Welcome, chosen ones of God. If you've found this video today, it's not by accident. You were led here for a purpose greater than you may yet understand. The very fact that you're here means you're being stirred by something deeper, a quiet call echoing from eternity. You are not random, not forgotten, not aimless. You are seen, known, and pursued by a God who whispers truth into the hearts of those who dare to listen. That's why I urge you to stay with me until the end of this message. What you're about to hear could very well shift your life's direction forever. Now, let us take a breath and go deeper. Today, I want to speak with you about spiritual thought, about the kind of reflection that does not skim the surface but pierces the soul. We live in a world flooded with noise, distraction, and answers that arrive before we've asked the right questions. But real transformation begins not with quick solutions, but with quiet, honest thinking. What do you believe about God? Why do you wrestle with faith? Do you ever wonder if your prayers go unheard? These are not signs of weak belief. They are the starting points of a deeper awakening. Too often we treat God's will as if it were a set of rigid commands from a distant king. But I tell you, His desire is not tyranny, it is invitation. I have found that the divine will is not about control, but about healing, restoration, and joy. What feels like resistance is often grace in disguise. If only we could see beyond our fear, we'd realize that His demands lead not to chains, but to freedom. This journey into spiritual thought and discovery of faith is not for the passive, it's for the courageous soul who longs to be truly alive. Before we begin our journey together, I want to invite you into more than just listening. I invite you to engage. This message isn't just for you to hear, it's for you to experience. As we move forward, I'll explore the questions you carry, and together we'll search for the answers that last. So stay with me through to the end, because by the final word, your heart may understand what your mind has long wrestled with. If you're new to this space, go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. If this message already touches something in you, hit that like button so it can reach someone else in need. And if you feel called to respond, comment below with the number 777, a sign that you're walking toward divine revelation. Now take a breath, prepare your heart, and let's begin your journey of deeper faith and clearer vision right now. Some burdens are so quietly carried that even those closest to you never see their weight. You wake each day with responsibilities already pressing down on your shoulders. Deadlines, expectations, worries, fears, they all stack one upon another, invisible to the outside world, but all too real to your soul. The strength it takes just to function becomes so familiar, you begin to believe it's normal. But exhaustion is not supposed to be your permanent state. You were not created to endlessly push through. That pressure you feel, that heaviness in your chest, is not failure, it's a signal. Something inside is calling out for rest. Not just physical rest, but a deeper release. The kind only the Spirit understands. In the silence of your thoughts, you may have whispered, even if only to yourself, that you are tired. Tired of holding it all together. Tired of pretending to be okay. Tired of smiling when your heart is aching and showing up when you feel like disappearing. That kind of fatigue is not weakness. It is the soul's way of alerting you that you've been living outside your limits. I have walked that road, worn the mask of strength while trembling within, and I can tell you God hears what no one else hears. He sees what you hide, and He's not waiting for you to collapse. He's already beside you, ready to carry what has worn you down. I've come to believe that much of our exhaustion stems not from what we do, but from what we refuse to release. We assume that if we don't keep pushing, everything will fall apart. There's a belief, quiet but persistent, that we must be the glue holding everyone and everything together. It's the lie of self-sufficiency disguised as strength. But there's a cost. When you carry what you were never meant to bear, you begin to forget who you are beneath the weight. The soul becomes weary, not just from the tasks, but from the illusion that your value is tied to performance and control. Faith begins in the moment you recognize that control was never the goal. It is not faith if you're still gripping the reins in fear. What we often call strength is sometimes just fear dressed up in determination. I know what it feels like to hold so tightly to everything, to plans, to people, to outcomes, and still feel as though none of it is secure. That is the paradox of control. The more we clutch, the more we fear losing. But God never called us to carry the world. He invites us to trust the one who already does. And here is where your soul must lean in, because this is not about ignoring responsibility or abandoning your calling. This is about remembering that you were never asked to walk through life in your own strength. The weariness you feel is not a reason for shame. It is an invitation. An invitation to step back, breathe deep, and hear the voice that has been speaking all along. Come to me. Come, not as the version of yourself that performs or impresses. Come as the one who's simply tired. Come as the one who has nothing left to prove. It is a sacred thing to admit you're not okay. In that surrender, something holy begins to happen. You move from surviving to receiving. You begin to understand that surrender is not defeat, it is the beginning of renewal. When you release what has drained you, space opens up for grace to enter. That grace does not demand performance. It does not shame your need. It meets you exactly where you are, with no conditions except your willingness to receive. And so, here is what I know. The very weight that has crushed you is what God is prepared to carry. Not because you failed, but because you were never meant to lift it alone. Every silent prayer, every moment you whispered, "I can't do this anymore," was heard, and it was not ignored. It was answered with a gentle call again and again. You don't have to do this by yourself. As someone who once believed I needed to be strong for everyone, I can tell you that strength is not found in striving. It's discovered in surrender. And the more I handed over, the more I discovered a freedom I never knew existed. There is peace in releasing what was never yours to hold. There is clarity in loosening your grip. And there is unimaginable strength in falling. Not into defeat, but into the arms of a God who never grows weary, who never drops what we give him, who never stops reaching for the tired, the anxious, the overburdened. You've fought long enough. You've stood tall even when your knees buckled. But now, hear this truth. You don't have to fight alone. And more than that, you were never meant to. What if the greatest act of faith is not continuing to carry your burden, but finally placing it in hands more capable than your own? The God who created your soul also knows how to restore it. And he's not waiting for you to earn his help. He's simply waiting for you to accept it. There are words in Scripture that do not just speak, they echo. They do not age with time, but grow deeper each time they're heard. One such invitation still reverberates across centuries, touching tired hearts in every generation. It is not a command barked from a throne, nor a condition tied to performance. It is a whisper from eternity, spoken by the only one who knows what your soul truly needs. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. That verse, found in Matthew 11:28, is not just theology. It is a lifeline. It is heaven calling earth to lay down its exhaustion in exchange for peace. There's something radical about that offer when you pause to feel its weight. Most of the world answers your fatigue with one word: more, try more, do more, fix more, be more. And yet the voice of Christ says the opposite. Not more, but less. Less striving, less carrying, less pretending. What he asks is not another act of endurance, but a release of what you were never designed to hold. He doesn't need you to get stronger before you approach him. He's not measuring your performance before deciding if you're worthy of relief. He invites you as you are, drained, defeated, worn thin by the effort of trying to manage a life too heavy for your shoulders. That invitation is not conditional. It is not given to the qualified, the well-behaved, or the problem-free. It is extended to the tired, the anxious, the overwhelmed, the ones barely hanging on. In his kingdom, rest is not a reward for the competent. It is the starting point for the broken. That is the message Christ brings. Not do more for me, but let me carry what's crushing you. And it changes everything. What I've discovered in my own walk is that there comes a sacred turning point in every believer's journey. It's the moment you stop asking, "How can I keep going?" and start asking, "What if I don't have to?" That shift is not laziness. It is the beginning of wisdom. It is the doorway into grace, because it's only when you truly stop trying to be your own savior that you make room for the actual savior to step in. He will not wrestle the burden from your grip, but he will wait until your hands are open, and in that gesture of surrender, the miraculous unfolds. Surrender is not an abandonment of responsibility. It is a recognition of divine partnership. To say, "I trust you with this," is not passive, it is powerful. It is to say, "This is no longer mine to fix, because it was never mine to control." And when you pray those words, not as a ritual, but as a cry from your soul, you'll find that heaven listens differently. God does not rush the process. He honors trust. And the moment you stop clenching your future, your pain, your plans so tightly, you discover he was always capable of carrying them far better than you ever could. There is a reason why spiritual fatigue often comes just before breakthrough. That weariness is a signal that your own efforts have reached their limits, and that is precisely where God's supernatural intervention begins. You were never expected to be enough on your own. You were created to walk hand in hand with a power far greater than yourself. When I reached that place, when my own strength dissolved and all that remained was the simple prayer, "I can't," I found that heaven never looked down in disappointment. It leaned in closer. This is the paradox of faith. The greatest strength comes through the deepest letting go. When we no longer believe the lie that God only helps those who help themselves, we step into a deeper truth. God helps those who admit they can't help themselves. It is not your resolve that moves the hand of God. It is your release. And until you release, you will never know what he was ready to carry all along. Even now, you might feel that releasing control is dangerous, that without your grip on the situation, everything will fall apart. But ask yourself, has holding on ever truly brought peace? Has the pressure ever truly delivered joy? You were not meant to live clenched in fear. You were meant to move in faith. And faith does not demand that you have all the answers. It only asks that you believe someone else does. And when you finally say, "God, I give this to you," something invisible shifts. Maybe not in your circumstances at first, but in your soul. The storm may still rage, but your spirit begins to breathe again. The weight may still exist, but it's no longer yours to carry alone. And in that space, the impossible becomes possible. Peace arrives not because the battle has ended, but because you're no longer fighting it alone. What's extraordinary about this rest is that it doesn't come from escape, but from presence. It's not about avoiding the hard things. It's about knowing you don't face them alone. It's the assurance that Jesus is not outside the storm calling you to survive it. He is in the boat with you, whispering, "Peace, be still," not only to the waves, but to your heart. He is the calm in your chaos, the anchor in your drifting, the strength in your surrender. So, hear the invitation again, not as ancient poetry, but as a present whisper. Come to me, all who are weary. That includes you, especially you. The one who spoke those words is not waiting for your perfection. He is waiting for your permission. When you stop trying to manage everything and finally hand it over, you'll discover that rest is not a concept, it is a person. And he's been waiting for you to come, not someday when you feel more worthy, not when the pain is less sharp or the questions are all answered, but now, just as you are. Because it's not what you bring to him that makes you worthy, it's who he is that makes the invitation real. And so the invitation stands as strong and gentle as ever. Come, lay it down, let him carry what you cannot. That is where rest begins, and that is where restoration unfolds. Surrender is often misunderstood. In our world, it carries the scent of loss, the impression of quitting, the image of someone walking away from the battlefield with head bowed. But in the realm of the spirit, surrender looks entirely different. It is not the act of defeat, it is the posture of trust. The psalmist once declared, "Cast your burden on the Lord and he will sustain you." That is not the language of the weak. That is the voice of someone who has learned that strength without surrender is often a slower form of collapse. It is a call to shift the weight, not away from responsibility, but away from isolation. Holding on to your burden too long doesn't make you noble, it makes you tired. And what I've found is that our refusal to release the weight is rarely about endurance. It is about doubt. We do not always trust that God will carry what we put down. So we cling, we push, we stay up late, wrestling with questions our minds were never meant to solve alone. But faith does not thrive in clenched fists. It grows in open hands. The longer you grip your pain, the more you convince yourself that God is a spectator instead of your sustainer. Real faith is not found in never falling apart. It is found in knowing exactly who to fall toward. When we believe that we must do it all, fix it all, plan it all, we edge God out of the story. We may not say it aloud, but our actions confess it. If I don't handle this, no one will. But that is not the gospel. That is fear dressed in control. And fear, even when masked with logic and planning, will always lead you to exhaustion. God never asked you to become your own deliverer. He only asked that you believe He already is. The most sacred shifts in my life have happened when I finally stopped trying to outrun failure and started learning how to rest in God's sufficiency. That rest didn't come through escape or apathy. It came through a conscious choice to believe that the same hands that shaped the stars could hold the mess I couldn't fix. When you say, "I'm done carrying this," you are not admitting defeat. You are giving God permission to step into the space your strength no longer can. That's where miracles begin. There's something holy about the moment you exhale and say, "God, this is yours now." The burdens don't always vanish, but they change in weight. You begin to sense a presence alongside you, one who lifts what you can't. The beauty of faith is not found in constant doing, but in quiet yielding. When you stop trying to be the answer, you make room for the answer himself. That is not irresponsibility. It is alignment. The creator of your soul never meant for you to carry its deepest wounds alone. And here's what's even more profound. God is not waiting for a dramatic ceremony of surrender. He moves the moment your heart yields in silence. There are prayers without words that shake heaven more than sermons. There are quiet moments where tears fall in the dark, and that single act of release becomes the birthplace of healing. When you give God what's too heavy, you are not emptying your hands, you're making space for peace to enter. To hold on to what is breaking you is not bravery. To keep moving forward while unraveling within is not strength. The deeper courage is found in the soul who whispers, "I trust you," even as everything feels uncertain. That is not weakness, it is worship. It is to say, "I believe you are who you say you are, even when nothing around me reflects it yet." Faith at its core is not about sight, it's about surrender. And when surrender is authentic, transformation follows. What I've come to understand is that some of God's greatest works in our lives begin the moment we get out of the way. When we stop trying to manage every detail and instead give space for divine wisdom to take over, things start moving in directions we could never have orchestrated. Your effort alone cannot unlock what only His hand can open. But your surrender, that changes everything. So hear this clearly. Surrender is not giving up. It is giving in to something greater. It is not letting go of hope. It is placing hope in someone who cannot fail. You don't have to collapse under the pressure to be all things to all people. You were never asked to. What you have been offered is a promise. He will sustain you. Not might, not sometimes, He will. And if that is true, and I assure you it is, then your role is not to carry the impossible. It is to trust the one who already conquered it. Genuine faith doesn't mean you never feel the weight. It means you know where to lay it down. That knowledge is not academic. It is spiritual wisdom forged in fire. And today, if you are tired, then perhaps that is your signal. Not that you're failing, but that you are finally ready to stop doing everything and start trusting the one who can do anything. Strength is not always found in the roar of determination. Sometimes it emerges in the quiet confession, "I can't do this anymore." That moment, when your energy fails, when your logic falls short, when your resolve fades, is often seen as the end. But from where I stand, it is the beginning. That space of raw human limitation is not a curse to be avoided, it is sacred ground. The Apostle Paul once recorded these divine words, My power is made perfect in weakness. That was not poetic encouragement, it was spiritual law. And over the years, I have discovered this to be unfailingly true. God's power does not meet us at our most competent. It meets us precisely when we run out of competence altogether. This may feel counterintuitive, especially to those raised in a world that rewards relentless independence and applauds self-sufficiency. We are taught that weakness is something to conceal, to overcome, or to disguise with confidence. But heaven reads weakness differently. Where the world sees a failure to thrive, God sees a heart ready to receive. The moment you stop posturing is the moment you become truly available to divine strength. God is not looking for the polished, the perfect, or the put together. He seeks the surrendered, the ones whose hands are no longer closed around their own efforts, but lifted in trust. And what does it mean to truly trust? Not simply to agree that God is good, but to believe it so deeply that you place your brokenness into His care. That is where transformation begins. When you hand over your fear, your inadequacy, your pain, yes, even your doubt, you are not offering Him your failure, you are giving Him permission to build something new from the ruins. We often try to meet God with our best selves, but He is waiting for us in the exact place where we've run out of options. That moment when the strong front cracks, when tears come uninvited, when silence falls because words are no longer enough. That is not the breakdown. That is the breakthrough. What I've come to understand is this: surrender is not the end of the story, it's the clearing of the stage. When we stop performing strength, we make space for real power to act. That space is not empty, it is holy. And it is in that vacancy, that openness, that the Spirit of God does His most profound work. Faith is not about trying harder, it's about yielding more deeply. You are not asked to prove your worth through perseverance. You are invited to know God through dependence. It is in your lowest places that God's glory often rises the highest. Why? Because when you no longer compete with Him for control, His grace is free to take over fully. There is no shadow of your effort to confuse the source. The healing, the peace, the wisdom, it becomes undeniably divine. This is why Paul declared that he would boast all the more in his weakness, not because he enjoyed suffering, but because he had discovered the mystery that in weakness, the Eternal steps in with unmatched power. Perhaps you've been told to push through, to keep moving no matter what. But what if the real invitation is to stop moving long enough to be moved by something greater? What if your weakness is not a signal to push harder, but a signal to bow lower, not in shame, but in holy expectation? The ground of surrender is where miracles take root. It's the soil God uses to grow things that could never rise in the hardened ground of self-will. I have seen more spiritual clarity in the silence of exhaustion than in the noise of achievement. Because when you are too tired to pretend, you finally begin to pray. Not with eloquence, but with honesty. And God responds not to formality, but to truth. When your words are few, but your heart is wide open, that is when heaven draws closest. God is not waiting for the perfect prayer. He is waiting for the real one. If you reach the end of your ability, then you are standing at the doorstep of divine possibility. The greatest spiritual shifts do not begin in victory, they begin in surrender. Not once you feel strong again, but precisely when you feel most fragile. That is when you become the perfect vessel for the power of God to pour through. Because power made perfect in weakness is not about God patching up what's broken. It's about Him shining through the cracks. And so, I invite you to stop apologizing for your weakness. Instead, recognize it as the doorway through which God enters. You do not need to brace yourself for what's next. You need to release yourself into the arms that have already gone ahead of you, the ones that hold all things together, the ones that carried the cross not to demand your strength, but to offer you grace in place of it. I have walked long enough through valleys to know that the light doesn't always appear at the beginning. Sometimes, it only comes when your eyes have grown tired of searching and your spirit finally turns inward and upward. That upward glance, when all else has failed, is where hope begins. Not because you've mastered the path, but because you've finally admitted you can't walk it alone. And in that moment, the God of all comfort doesn't send help. He becomes it. The paradox is clear. You will never be more powerful than when you've completely surrendered. Because when your hands are empty, they are finally ready to receive. When your heart is exposed, it is finally ready to be healed. And when your soul whispers, "I can't," heaven responds, "I already have." That is the divine exchange. Your weakness for His strength, your surrender for His presence, your emptiness for His fullness. This is not the end of your story. This is where it truly begins. Faith is not passive acceptance. It is not apathy wrapped in holy words. True faith is the bold, daily act of placing what matters most into hands you cannot see and trusting they are stronger than your own. To entrust your family, your dreams, your health, your future into God's care is not an escape from responsibility. It is the fullest expression of it. It is to say, I am no longer the sole guardian of what I love. I am no longer the architect of every outcome. I believe there is one wiser, kinder, and more capable than I am. That is not giving up. That is stepping deeper into what it means to live by trust. Too many believe that surrender is the end of involvement, as if faith means closing your eyes and waiting for miracles. But I've learnt that real surrender is far more demanding. It asks that you release your grip on the illusion of control while continuing to move forward with open hands. It is possible to act with wisdom and strength while no longer carrying the pressure of final results. That balance of living fully while no longer straining to hold all things together is where peace begins to take root. And peace is not a fragile emotion, it is a power. It anchors the soul when storms break loose. It quiets the noise that panic amplifies, and it only comes when you trust that God is actively involved in your life, not as a distant spectator, but as a present and loving Father. The peace of God doesn't require ideal circumstances. It requires surrendered hearts. That's why it's so rare and so powerful, because it doesn't come from things working out as you planned, but from knowing that even when they don't, you are not alone in the chaos. I've often asked myself what it truly means to walk by faith and not by sight. And every time I return to the same realization. Walking by faith means moving forward without needing all the answers. It means choosing to rest while the details remain unresolved. It means believing that God is not only aware of your needs, but working on your behalf, even when the evidence seems slow to arrive. The mind might resist this. It will always crave certainty, but the soul recognizes something deeper. The subtle shift when trust replaces fear, when divine assurance overrides human anxiety. To give something to God is not to lose it. It is to place it where it can truly be protected, nourished, and transformed. So when you entrust your children, your future, your relationships to Him, you are not stepping back. You are stepping into a fuller partnership with the one who has never failed. You're declaring, not in words alone, but through action, that your life is safest, not in your own grasp, but in His care. And that is where real freedom begins. Not when everything is solved, but when your heart is no longer tangled in the pressure to solve it all. You begin to live lighter, love deeper, hope longer, because you know who holds your tomorrow. And when that trust takes root, peace flows like a quiet river beneath every surface storm. Not perfection, but presence. Not absence of difficulty, but assurance in the midst of it. That's the promise. That's the power of placing it all in God's hands and leaving it there. Faith in this truest form is not something static. It moves with you. It breathes in the pauses between clarity and confusion. It shows up in the tension between responsibility and release. It reminds you that you're not in this alone. Not ever. The very act of entrusting your deepest cares to God is not the forfeiting of purpose, but the recovering of it. You begin to understand that your role is not to manufacture results, but to remain faithful in the waiting. Your job is not to carry outcomes on your back, but to walk in obedience and let God carry the rest. When you live like this, your posture changes. You no longer walk with a clenched jaw or a restless mind. You learn to breathe again, even in the middle of uncertainty. And that breath, that exhale of surrender, becomes the rhythm of your days. You begin to see the fingerprints of God where you once only saw frustration. You start to notice how He rearranges what looked like delays into divine alignment. You recognize that the same God who holds the stars in place is more than capable of holding the pieces of your life in perfect order. Surrender does not mean disengagement. It means alignment. It means you no longer act as if everything depends on you. It means you stop assigning yourself the weight of outcomes and learn to trust that the process has always been guided by the one who sees the whole picture. And when you forget, as you will, when you slip back into patterns of control, you simply return. Again and again you return to that place of trust, of yieldedness, of peace that surpasses understanding. There is no formula, no checklist, no perfect version of how to walk this way. There is only the daily invitation to release and believe. And each time you say yes to that invitation, you step deeper into a kind of strength that doesn't burn you out, a kind of peace that doesn't come and go, a kind of clarity that only heaven can give. So hold this truth close. You are not failing when you lay things down. You are stepping into the very essence of faith. And when you do, when you place your future, your fears, and your hopes into the hands of God and trust Him to do what only He can, that is not the end of the journey. That is the beginning of real life. Not a life free from struggle, but a life filled with grace, sustained by peace, and marked by the quiet, powerful confidence that you are no longer carrying it alone. Peace that holds firm in the middle of life's storms is not the result of circumstances aligning or struggles ending. It is born from surrender, not the type the world assumes, resignation, defeat, but a surrender that lifts the burden off your shoulders and places it in the hands of the Almighty. There is a quiet strength found when the soul says, "I don't have to carry this anymore." That is not passivity. That is wisdom wrapped in faith. You stop bracing against the wind and begin to lean into the one who calms it. What I've seen in both life and spirit is this: the more we try to control the uncontrollable, the more exhausted we become. Holding everything together with our own hands may seem noble, but it is often the very reason we feel fractured inside. We weren't designed to hold the world. We were created to trust the one who does. And when that realization breaks through the walls of anxiety and striving, something unshakable takes root in us. That is where peace begins. Not after the storm has passed, but while it still rages around you. It is in that raging that God often does His deepest work, not in the moments of clarity, but in the moments of surrender. And surrender is not a collapse, it is a conscious choice. It is the decision to stop surviving in your own strength and begin abiding in His. Real surrender does not strip you of your identity, it returns you to it. You are not the one who must see the entire road ahead. You are a child of God, and your role is not to play God, but to trust Him. God has never been limited by impossibility. On the contrary, He often chooses the most impossible spaces to showcase His strength. You may be walking through circumstances where you see no logical path forward, financial burdens, fractured relationships, decisions that seem to have no good option. But He is still the one who makes a way where there is no way. This isn't metaphor or myth. It is the pattern of His character throughout time. He parted seas for those who trusted. He rained down provision in deserts. He opened prison doors without keys. These were not moments of chance. They were answers to surrendered hearts who stopped depending on themselves and started leaning fully on Him. When you try to manage everything, the pressure builds. You overthink. You plan every outcome. You worry about what others think, about what you might lose, about what might go wrong. It wears down your body, clouds your mind, and burdens your soul. But when you finally reach that sacred place where your heart whispers, "God, I can't carry this," something shifts. That is where the burden begins to lift. Not always in the natural, but always in the spirit. And that lifting is not the end of the struggle, but the beginning of peace. If your heart has been trying to manage everything, hold everyone up, predict the outcomes, and carry the future, this is the moment to stop. Not because you've failed, but because you've reached the moment God has been waiting for. The moment you finally realize that His way is not to make you stronger, but to carry you in your weakness. And in doing so, he brings about outcomes you never could have orchestrated with your best strategy. The battle shifts when the burden is no longer yours to bear. Peace, real peace, is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of God in the middle of it. It arrives when you stop running and sit in the awareness that you are not alone and you are not forgotten. That presence is not a feeling that fades. It is a truth that anchors. Once you've experienced it, you begin to see storms differently. You stop asking, "When will this end?" and start asking, "How can I walk through this with deeper faith?" That shift changes everything, not because the problem disappears, but because fear loses its grip. And this perhaps is the greatest paradox of all, that when you are at your most overwhelmed, most unsure, most broken, you are also closest to peace, if you choose surrender. That peace is not found in perfection. It is not the reward for performance. It is the result of yielding. God doesn't require you to understand the why or the how. He asks that you trust the who. And when your trust shifts from yourself to Him, your burden shifts too. Not because the problem immediately dissolves, but because now the weight of it rests in hands much stronger than your own. There is something profound that happens when we release what we can't control. The act of surrender creates room, and in that space the supernatural begins. God doesn't need you to perform, He desires your trust. The moment you step back is the moment He steps in, not as a last resort, but as the first true solution. What feels like delay or silence is often preparation. Your trial is not a punishment. It is a platform for God to reveal what only He can do. He waits not for you to prove your worth, but for you to open your hands. And so the invitation stands. Stop holding the world so tightly. You were never meant to save it. Lay down the anxiety that keeps you pacing in the dark. Release the pressure to have all the answers. You are not losing control. You are giving it back to the one who was never out of it. This is where peace lives. Not in understanding everything, but in knowing that you are held by someone who already does. And that assurance, more than anything else, is what allows the heart to rest, even in the fiercest of storms. You may feel like the winds are stronger than your strength, but the God who walks with you is not shaken. He is not overwhelmed. He is not confused or late. He is waiting even now for the space to act in power. The storm you're facing is not too much for Him. And when you surrender, when you choose to release the fight within and simply trust that He sees, He hears, and He is already working, that is when peace rises, not as escape, but as evidence that His presence is greater than any pressure. That is the kind of peace no storm can steal, and it begins with surrender. Patience, in the language of the soul, is often the most difficult virtue to master. We live in a culture that rewards urgency, celebrates instant results, and equates waiting with weakness. We expect answers to arrive as quickly as questions are asked. But the rhythm of heaven is not rushed. The hand of God moves not by the ticking of clocks, but by the unfolding of purpose. And while we often cry out for immediate relief, what we truly need is what only His timing can provide. Something not only good, but beautifully right. There is wisdom in the ancient words of Ecclesiastes 3:11. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Not your time, not my time, but His. This truth can be hard to accept when you're staring at a closed door, waiting on a breakthrough, or longing for healing that is yet to come. We assume delay means denial, but that is rarely the case. What feels like a pause in your life might be the very space where God is crafting something deeper. Delay does not mean absence, it means preparation. The silence that frustrates you may be filled with the sound of unseen foundations being laid. And while we look for speed, God is forming strength. While we want motion, He is creating meaning. The challenge lies in our nature. We are wired to avoid discomfort. We measure progress in short bursts. If something doesn't shift quickly, we question its value, or worse, God's presence. But I have come to believe that delay is one of God's most powerful tools. It shapes our character, it exposes our motives, it purifies our trust. When things come too quickly, we often forget the one who gave them, but when they come through waiting, we never forget the one who sustained us until they arrived. The very act of waiting can become an altar of worship when we learn to see it not as punishment, but as purpose. I've wrestled with time more than once. I've watched dreams take longer than expected, watched prayers feel like they vanished into silence. But again and again I discovered this. God's timing does not bend to my anxiety, but it always answers my need. Not one moment too late, not one moment too early. What He withholds for a season, He delivers with clarity when the moment is right. And when it comes, it carries a weight that rush never brings. Maturity, perspective, and a deeper awe of His faithfulness. There are things that can only grow in the soil of waiting. Deep roots are not formed in storms of activity, but in slow, steady surrender. Faith becomes less about what you expect to receive and more about who you're becoming in the process. Every delay becomes a chance to lean in, to ask not just when, but what are you doing in me while I wait? That question, when asked in trust, unlocks a new dimension of grace. God is never in a hurry, but He is always intentional. This is where faith becomes most real. Not when everything is happening, but when nothing is moving and you still choose to trust. Trust that what you cannot see is still unfolding. Trust that what you are waiting for is not lost, only ripening in a soil you cannot yet touch. Faith in God's timing means you release your demands for now and embrace His plan for better. You trade your calendar for His design. You stop measuring success by speed and begin to measure by surrender. God's timing is not random, it is intentional. You are not being overlooked, you are being aligned. Often, while you are praying for the door to open, He is shaping you into someone who can walk through it with wisdom. He is protecting you from arriving too soon and collapsing under the weight of a blessing not yet prepared to carry. You may think you're ready, but He knows the terrain ahead. He sees the delays you can't afford to skip, the lessons you cannot bypass if you want to truly last in what He has called you to do. And here's what I've found. The longer the wait, the sweeter the arrival. Not because the blessing changed, but because you did. You're no longer grabbing at something for validation. You're receiving something with gratitude. You're not rushing through a moment. You're grounded in it, aware of its holiness, aware that it didn't just come to you, it was crafted for you. That kind of peace cannot be manufactured. It is only formed in seasons of trust. It is in this place of waiting that peace can either fade or grow. The deciding factor is whether you believe the one you're waiting on is good. If you see Him as indifferent or distant, the delay will feel cruel. But if you know Him as wise and near, even the wait becomes sacred. And it is there, in the quiet trust of an unseen schedule, that the soul begins to rest. Not because the answer has come, but because the trust has deepened. Peace is the fruit of trusting a timeline you do not control, but you know is authored by perfect love. So if you are waiting today, do not rush the process. Do not despise the pause. God is not late. He never has been. He is shaping the outcome to fit not just your hopes, but your true design. And when it arrives, it will not be the result of your striving, but the evidence of His sovereignty. The path may seem still, but that does not mean it is empty. Every quiet moment is laced with divine intention. And in time, not your time, but His, you will look back and see what now only faith can perceive. He made everything beautiful, exactly when it was meant to be. There is a quiet kind of exhaustion that creeps in when we forget we are human. Not the visible fatigue that sleep can cure, but the soul weariness that comes from pushing ourselves beyond the boundaries God never asked us to cross. It often starts subtly. A few late nights, a few more burdens carried alone, a growing belief that everything depends on our effort. But soon the mind grows heavy, the spirit dulls, and we wonder why peace feels so far away. The truth is simple. We are tired because we've been trying to live as if we have no limits. But we do, and those limits are not flaws, they are invitations. Somewhere along the way, we began to believe that being faithful meant never slowing down, that serving God meant constantly doing, solving, fixing, producing. But the soul was not built for endless output. It was built for trust, and trust begins where striving ends. When I reached the end of myself, when I could no longer pretend to carry it all, I discovered something more valuable than achievement. I discovered grace. I found the reality behind the words of Isaiah 40:29. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. That verse is not poetic comfort. It is divine strategy. When you are empty, He does not demand more. He gives more. The great mistake many make is assuming that God's strength is something you tap into only after you've proven yourself. But that is not the pattern of Scripture. God's strength doesn't come as a reward for perfection. It comes as a response to surrender. It begins where your effort ends. When you come to the end of your capacity, when your emotional reserves run dry, when your wisdom no longer suffices, that is not a point of failure. It is the precise place where the supernatural begins. It is where God takes over, not because you've impressed Him, but because you've allowed Him. I often reflect on the paradox of spiritual life. We try to be strong to please a God who never asked for our strength. What He asks for is faith. And faith isn't displayed in endless activity. It's revealed in the courage to rest, to stop, to say, I cannot do this on my own. That declaration is not weakness, it is alignment. You were never meant to be your own source. Your strength was always meant to run out so His could begin. If it never ran out, you would never need Him. But you do. We all do. And perhaps that's the problem. We resist the very moments designed to lead us to God. We fight against our own limits instead of leaning into them. We treat exhaustion as a flaw to correct rather than a signal to listen. But weariness can be a holy thing. It is often the soul's way of whispering, you are trying to do what only God can. And when we finally stop and pay attention to that whisper, we find that rest is not weakness, it is worship, it is trust in action. It is the posture that says, God, I believe you're not just able, you're willing to carry me. In my own journey, I've come to see that pushing past our limits rarely leads to deeper faith. It usually leads to deeper burnout. But when we acknowledge our limits and offer them to God, something sacred happens. He doesn't just restore our energy, He restores our perspective. We begin to see that life is not meant to be a constant race, but a daily walk, with Him, beside Him, under His strength, and the steps we take with Him are far more powerful than miles we try to run alone. If you are feeling overwhelmed, stretched thin, or quietly broken, it may not be because you've failed. It may be because you've reached the place where God intends to meet you. He is not disappointed by your tiredness. He is not surprised by your limits. In fact, He is already prepared to fill the gap. His strength is not a distant force to earn. It is a present gift to receive. And the only qualification for receiving it is to need it. So stop trying to prove how much more you can take. Stop holding yourself to a standard God never required. If the burden has become too heavy, it's not because you're too weak. It's because it was never meant to be carried without Him. The human soul was not created to be self-sufficient. It was created to be sustained. And the one who sustains you is never late, never limited, and never tired. There is freedom in admitting you can't keep going the way you've been going. There is peace in stepping back and saying, God, I've reached the edge. Because that edge, painful as it feels, is not the end. It's the threshold. On the other side of that threshold is divine power, ready and waiting. The moment you say, I can't, heaven responds, I can. That's where your strength is renewed, not when you push harder, but when you rest deeper. And in that rest, you will find more than recovery. You will find a God who gives strength to the weary and power to those who finally stop pretending they don't need it. There is a quiet kind of freedom that comes when you stop trying to control the clock, the need to know when things will change, when doors will open, when healing will arrive. It can consume your peace. We long for certainty, not only in what will happen, but in when it will happen. And so we watch the calendar more than we listen to God. But time in God's hands moves differently. It is not measured in urgency, but in purpose. When you release the timing of your breakthrough to Him, you are not giving up control. You are choosing rest over striving. You are trusting that the one who designed time also knows how to fulfill His promises in it. Victory belongs to God, and so does its timing. What we often forget is that waiting is not wasted space, it is a sacred process. In those stretches of silence, when nothing seems to be happening, something always is. God is not still simply because you don't see movement. He works in the unseen, aligns the pieces, protects you from premature outcomes, and prepares you for what you are not yet ready to carry. You may feel delayed, but God is deeply intentional. While you're praying for a miracle, He's cultivating the soil beneath your feet, ensuring that when the blessing comes, you'll be able to walk in it with maturity, not just enthusiasm. The human heart struggles with waiting because we associate stillness with passivity. But in the kingdom of God, waiting is a form of trust. It is one of the most active spiritual postures a person can take. To wait on God is to declare, "I believe you know better than I do." It is a daily surrender of your sense of control in exchange for His sovereignty. And in doing so, you shift from anxiety to peace, not because the circumstances change, but because your perspective does. I've lived long enough to learn this. Every time I've tried to rush a result, I've missed the refinement. I've clung to my own timelines, only to find that I was not ready for what I was demanding. But the moments I've released the outcome and its timing, those are the seasons I grew the most. Because in those moments, I was no longer chasing what I thought I needed. I was learning how to walk step by step with a God who doesn't hurry, but never delays. It is in those quiet seasons that your faith matures. You stop basing your trust on how fast things are moving and start rooting it in who God is. You learn to walk through unanswered prayers, not with bitterness, but with a quiet expectation. And that shift, when your trust no longer depends on visible progress, that is when your spirit deepens. God does not wait for you to understand everything. He simply waits for you to take the next step. And when you do, He provides just enough light to move forward, just enough strength to endure, and just enough grace to keep going. The truth is, God's work is never stalled. Even when your plans are on pause, His purpose is still moving. You may not see it, but heaven is never stagnant. The people, places, and moments that will intersect with your life are already being set into motion. The breakthroughs you are hoping for are not lost. They are simply maturing behind the curtain of time. And when the moment is right, they will appear not as accidents, but as divine appointments. So stop trying to schedule your own deliverance. Stop exhausting yourself with questions like, when will it happen? Or how much longer must I wait? The real question is, will I trust God even here? Even when the answers are slow, even when your strength is fading, will you still believe He is good? That is the kind of faith that moves mountains, not because it rushes God, but because it rests in Him. Your heart was not designed to live in constant urgency. It was created for rhythms of trust. And that rhythm beats loudest when you stop demanding that God operate on your schedule and start aligning yourself with His. When you do, peace comes not after the victory, but before it. Because you no longer carry the pressure to produce the outcome. You simply carry the confidence that it will come when the time is right. So if you are waiting today, remember this: you are not forgotten. You are not falling behind. You are not being overlooked. You are being positioned. Trust the timing of the one who sees the end from the beginning. And as you walk step by step, hand in hand with the God who works in perfect seasons, you will discover that the wait was never about delay. It was about transformation. And the victory, when it arrives, will not just be the end of your struggle. It will be the evidence that God was working all along. Confusion is not the voice of God. When your thoughts spiral in fear, when your heart races from uncertainty, when you feel lost in the fog of unanswered questions, you are not hearing the shepherd. You are hearing the storm. God's voice, even when it confronts, always carries peace. And His plans, even when they challenge your comfort, always lead toward restoration, not ruin. That's why the words found in Jeremiah 29:11 remain a cornerstone of divine assurance. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Those words are not sentimental. They are a promise carved into the very nature of a God who never fails to complete what He begins. It is easy to believe this promise when the road is straight, when the path is clear, when progress is visible. But the test of faith is not whether you trust in the light, it is whether you believe while walking through the dark. There will be moments, perhaps even now, when everything around you seems uncertain. The relationships feel strained, the career path appears blocked, the next steps blur under the weight of too many unknowns. It is in these very moments that the enemy of peace whispers lies. That you're alone, that you've missed your chance, that the future is lost. But I've come to understand this deeply. God's silence is not abandonment, and His timing is never random. He does not leave your life up to chance. He weaves purpose through every detail, even when that purpose is hidden from view. You may not feel the security of God's plan in the present, but that does not mean it has vanished. Feelings are fleeting, but His intentions are steady. He is not reactive. He doesn't scramble to fix mistakes. His plans were set in motion long before your current fears took shape. When you trust Him, you are not surrendering to fate. You are aligning with a plan shaped by peace, not panic. If what you're experiencing right now feels like chaos, take heart. God's peace doesn't require peaceful surroundings. It thrives in surrendered hearts. And often, it's in the deepest fog that He calls you to anchor not in what you see, but in who He is. This is why recognizing the source of your fear is so essential. Anxiety, confusion, shame, these are not gifts of the Spirit. They are signals that you've picked up something foreign to God's voice. The moment you begin to believe that your story is off course beyond repair, remind yourself, God is not the author of fear. He doesn't lead with pressure, He leads with peace. He doesn't manipulate with fear of loss, He draws with promises of life. So if your internal dialogue sounds more like dread than hope, more like despair than direction, know that it is time to refocus. Not on what you feel, but on what He has said. Faith, in its truest form, is not blind optimism. It is a deep-rooted conviction that even in this, God is good. Even in delay, even in disappointment, even in pain, He sees beyond the present hardship to the future outcome. And the plans He holds are not merely to get you through. They are designed to grow you, to shape you into someone who reflects His nature more clearly. That shaping process is not always comfortable, but it is always covered in peace when it is submitted to Him. The way forward may look dim, but the one who sees the end from the beginning is not confused. You do not need to know all the details to rest in His direction. And peace doesn't mean you will always understand. It simply means you trust that your life is not random, that your circumstances are not wasted, and that the one who holds your future is already working ahead of you. The same God who declared His plans are to prosper and not to harm you hasn't changed. He has not rewritten His promise based on your performance. He hasn't revoked His plan because of your mistakes. His peace still stands, ready to meet you where your fear now resides. So breathe, pause the spiral of what-ifs, return to what you know is true. There is a plan, and the author of that plan is not finished. He does not abandon His story midway. He completes what He begins. And the peace you long for will not come from figuring everything out. It will come from resting in the certainty that your future is not fragile in His hands. You are safe in the purpose He has set. Even if you can't see it now, His plan is still working, still moving, still leading you toward peace, toward hope, toward a future more beautifully aligned with heaven than you ever dared to imagine. No chapter in your life tells the whole story. That truth, though simple, has carried me through some of the most difficult seasons of my journey. Pain, confusion, delay. These moments often feel final while we're living them, but in the divine narrative, they are only fragments. God does not write stories the way we do. He doesn't rush the ending to relieve tension or avoid discomfort. He uses each chapter, especially the painful ones, as intentional threads woven into something far greater than we can see at present. It's easy to become convinced that your current suffering defines the entire book of your life. When circumstances seem to unravel and the weight of grief or uncertainty rests heavy, we tend to believe that this is the final word. But I've come to understand something very different. The darkest chapters often set the stage for the most brilliant acts of redemption. What you're walking through now may feel senseless, even cruel, but God does not waste hardship. He redeems it. Every loss, every delay, every broken place becomes material in his hands. And he is not finished. You might feel stuck in a chapter that seems endlessly painful. But just as an author sees beyond the paragraph, so does God see beyond your moment. The tears you shed are not forgotten. They water the ground where healing will grow. The silence you endure is not abandonment. It's the quiet between the lines, where your soul is being reshaped for what's coming. The tension you feel is not meaningless. It is the stretching that prepares you to hold more than you ever could have carried before. God's storylines are not written for temporary comfort. They are crafted for eternal purpose. And that eternal purpose is not something you have to earn, it is something you are being prepared to receive. I've often said that pain has a strange way of clarifying our vision. It strips away what is superficial and reveals what is solid. It humbles us, reorients us, and if we allow it, deepens our dependency on the one who writes our story with perfect clarity. There is a kind of beauty that only grows out of brokenness, and it is this beauty God is cultivating in you, not because he delights in your struggle, but because he knows what can rise from the ashes when grace is allowed to do its work. What I've found over time is that the hardest chapters are also the most formative. They are where trust becomes real, where pride is stripped away, where clarity replaces illusion. These are the pages where the Spirit chisels your identity, not in ease, but in refinement. When you feel unseen, God is developing the parts of you that are eternal. When you feel broken, he is softening the soil of your heart to receive something deeper. None of it is arbitrary, none of it is cruel. All of it is pointing you somewhere far greater than where you began. And while it may be difficult to grasp in the present, this truth anchors everything. The chapter of pain is never the final one. The God who writes your story is also the one who knows how to bring it into completion. He does not end with despair, he ends with glory. Restoration is always on the horizon. That is not wishful thinking, it is the nature of who he is. His pattern throughout Scripture is clear. From death to resurrection, from exile to return, from silence to song. This is the rhythm of grace, and you are a part of it, whether you feel it or not. I believe the greatest stories God writes are not the ones that avoid conflict, but the ones that walk through it with hope. The most powerful testimonies are not from those who never suffered, but from those who discovered God's faithfulness in the fire. If you find yourself asking why things have unfolded the way they have, it is not a lack of faith. It is the heart reaching for perspective. And that is exactly where God meets us. Not always with answers, but with assurance. He whispers through the pain, "I am not done." That single truth can become a lifeline. You may not understand what this moment means, but you can trust that it means something. And what it means will only become clearer as the pages turn. And when the page does turn, as it always does, you will begin to see how every detail was connected. How the sorrow that felt senseless actually became soil for joy. How the nights that felt endless gave way to mornings filled with unexpected grace. How what once felt like a detour was actually the most direct route to your transformation. God is not writing a story of survival. He is writing a story of redemption, of beauty from ashes, of strength that rises from surrender. You are not defined by this one scene. There are pages yet to be written, and God is already in them. He is shaping outcomes beyond what you could engineer. He is preparing joy that will surprise you. He is restoring what looks unredeemable, and the suffering that now feels senseless will one day be a part of your testimony, not because it was easy, but because he did something holy through it. Faith is not pretending every chapter feels good. Faith is knowing that even when it doesn't, the story is still in good hands. And God, the author, writes stories with intention. His pen does not slip. His plan does not falter. He knows exactly where this part of your life fits in the larger narrative. So do not close the book too soon. Do not judge the story by the struggle you're in. The author is still writing, and his endings are always worth waiting for. Control is not always about power, it's often about fear. The deeper reason many people refuse to let go is not because they enjoy holding everything together, but because they're terrified of what might happen if they don't. Somewhere inside, a voice whispers that if they stop striving, everything will collapse. So they hold on tighter. They plan, overanalyze, anticipate worst-case scenarios, and try to fix things before they fall apart. But in doing so, they fall apart instead. Not all at once, but gradually, until their minds are overwhelmed, their bodies exhausted, and their hearts no longer able to carry the pressure they once thought they could manage. This is the point many reach without even realizing they're there. They keep moving, but with a kind of numbness. They smile in conversation, but inside, they are weary in ways they cannot explain. And the root of that weariness is not always their circumstances. It is the burden of control. Trying to manage every outcome, predict every reaction, ensure every need is met, drains the soul. Even good intentions become heavy when we try to take God's place in our own lives. And often we disguise this control as responsibility when it is actually a quiet refusal to trust. What I have learned is this: the invitation to surrender is not a loss, it is a rescue. God does not ask you to let go because He wants to take something from you. He asks because He wants to give you something better. Holding tightly to what is breaking you does not protect your peace, it destroys it. And no amount of planning or effort can replace the kind of rest that only comes from finally placing what you cannot carry into hands that never grow weary. This is not a call to ignore responsibility or stop taking action. It is about recognizing where your limits are and where His power begins. There is wisdom in stepping back, not as a sign of weakness, but as a declaration of trust. You are not expected to be the savior of your life. You were never designed for that role. And the sooner we recognize this truth, the sooner we open space for healing, for guidance, for clarity, for the quiet peace that enters not when we figure it all out, but when we finally admit we don't have to. So how do you actually let go? Not as a poetic gesture, but as a real, tangible step of faith. It begins with honesty. You name what's been consuming your thoughts. You confront what you've been trying to control, whether it's your finances, a relationship, your future, your health, or your image. And then, without needing perfect words or dramatic prayers, you hand it over. You say, God, this has exhausted me. I can't carry it anymore. I'm giving it to you. That moment is sacred. It shifts the weight from your shoulders to His. It doesn't always change your situation immediately, but it changes how you carry it. And that change is where peace is born. I found that the strongest people are not the ones who never falter. They're the ones who have learned how to lay things down. They've discovered that strength is not proven by how much they hold on to, but by how willingly they release what they were never meant to carry. And when they do, something beautiful happens. Their hearts begin to beat with freedom again. Their minds clear. Their bodies breathe deeper. They are no longer burdened by the fear of losing control, because they've discovered that control was never the goal. Faith was. The truth is, real transformation does not begin in striving. It begins in surrender. And surrender is not passive. It is an act of courage. It is choosing to believe that God sees what you can't, knows what you don't, and holds what you can't handle. That belief doesn't make you less responsible. It makes you more available to wisdom that comes from outside yourself. And that wisdom leads to a kind of living that is no longer driven by fear, but anchored in trust. If your body is tired, your thoughts scattered, and your spirit heavy, it may not be because you've done too little, but because you've tried to do too much on your own. There is a better way, a quieter way, a way where peace replaces panic and grace replaces guilt. And that way begins with one decision: to stop clenching your hands and open them instead, to release what you were never created to carry and receive what only God can give. This is where rest begins, not when everything is fixed, not when the chaos ends, but when your soul chooses trust over control. That decision, repeated day by day, will slowly restore what pressure tried to steal. It will make room for peace that does not depend on outcomes, and for strength that doesn't demand constant effort. The hands that hold your future are more capable than yours, and when you place your burdens there, you will find that surrender is not the end of your strength. It is the beginning of your renewal. Miracles rarely take place in crowded spaces. when the heart is overwhelmed with fear, when the mind is busy scripting every possible outcome, when the soul is packed with the noise of constant control, there's little room for anything divine to enter. But surrender clears a path. The moment you release your grasp on what you cannot change, you create space, holy, open space, for God to move in ways that only He can. The supernatural begins not in striving but in stillness, not in control but in trust. That's when miracles happen. Not because you've earned them, but because you've made room for them. You don't have to hold the whole world anymore. That burden, that pressure to be the glue that keeps everything from falling apart was never yours to carry. The soul was not designed to sustain the weight of every outcome, every decision, every unknown. That role belongs to God alone. When you hand Him what you've been trying to manage on your own, your fears, your family, your future, you step back from center stage. And He steps in with power and clarity that far exceeds human strategy. And when He steps in, something shifts. You're no longer operating from survival mode. You're no longer exhausted from spinning scenarios in your head. You stop bracing for the worst and begin expecting the unexpected. Because now, it's no longer your responsibility to manipulate the outcome. It's your opportunity to watch what happens when divine hands take over. Miracles don't only appear in grand displays, they often show up in subtle but undeniable ways. Peace that doesn't make sense, strength in the middle of fatigue, a solution where there was once a wall. The beautiful paradox is this: the less you do to control it, the more God does to complete it. He never forces His way in, He waits for your invitation. He doesn't invade your chaos, but He walks into it. The moment you say, "I can't, but you can," He won't let you fall. That is not a poetic idea, it's a truth I've lived. Time after time, I reached the limit of what I could hold, only to discover that He was already underneath me, catching what I couldn't carry. His grip is steadier than your effort. His presence is closer than your plans. And this is the irony that stuns the human heart. When you stop pushing, things start moving. When you take your hands off the wheel, His direction becomes clear. When you rest, His strength rises. Not because He needs your permission, but because He respects your freedom. He honors the will He gave you by waiting for your surrender. When you finally loosen your grip, that's when He acts. God moves most powerfully when we move out of the way, not in retreat, but in trust. You don't need to exhaust yourself trying to predict the future. That's not faith, it's anxiety wearing a mask. Faith says, even if I don't know what's next, I know who's leading me there. Faith is what remains when plans fall apart and peace still stays. And the beauty of living in surrender is that you begin to realize that things don't depend on your ability to maintain control. They depend on your willingness to release it. I've watched lives transform, not because people figured out the solution, but because they finally stopped pretending they had one. They stopped trying to fix what was never theirs to fix and started trusting the one who heals. And in that surrender, the impossible often unfolds. Relationships are restored, opportunities arise that no amount of networking could have orchestrated. The right doors open, not because you forced them, but because you were finally still enough to let God unlock them. Surrender is not passive, it's powerful. It's the moment you choose rest over worry, wisdom over noise, faith over fear. It's the moment you decide that your part is obedience, not control. So here is the truth. When you give up your illusion of control, you step into the reality of God's control. You stop managing every outcome and start expecting divine intervention. And that expectation is the soil where miracles grow. You may not know how, you may not know when, but when you step back in surrender, God steps forward in power. That's how it's always worked, and that's how it still works now. You no longer have to hold it all. The pressure is not yours to carry. The miracle is not yours to manufacture. God does His best work when you stop trying to do His job. So breathe, release, trust, and watch what happens when you make room for the one who has been waiting all along, not for your strength, but for your surrender, because that's when everything changes. That's when He acts, and that's when the impossible becomes real. You are stronger than you think, Not because you always have the answers or carry the weight with ease, but because your strength comes from knowing when to surrender. That is the greatest act of faith, not pressing harder, but choosing to trust deeper. In a world that demands performance, you've chosen peace. In the face of pressure, you've chosen purpose, and that makes you powerful. You have what it takes to keep going. You have what it takes to believe even when it's hard. You have what it takes to walk forward in faith, not because of your ability, but because of who walks beside you. This journey we've taken together is a reminder that letting go is not giving up. It is the most powerful declaration you can make. God, I trust you more than my fear. So today, place it all into His hands, the same hands that formed the stars, stilled the seas, and carried the cross. When you step back, His power steps in. When you release what doesn't work, you receive what only He can give. Now open your hands, open your heart, and make space for the miraculous to begin. Now, come with me into a moment of sacred stillness as we pray together. Father in heaven, we come to you now with hearts humbled, minds quieted, and spirits ready to receive what only you can give. You see us exactly as we are, tired, hopeful, bruised, expectant. You see the battles no one else knows, the questions no one else hears, the tears no one else catches. And yet you welcome us not with judgment, but with love, with arms wide open and a presence that never fails. Lord, today we lay down our striving. We stop trying to carry what we cannot fix. We place every fear, every unknown, every broken piece into your hands. Hands that formed galaxies. We ask first for peace. Not peace that depends on outcomes or explanations, but peace that surpasses understanding. The kind that settles deep into our bones and reminds us that we are safe, even when life feels uncertain. May your stillness guard our minds and calm the storms within our hearts. Anchor us in the truth that you are near, even when the noise of the world tries to drown it out. We ask for healing, complete healing. For those carrying sickness in their bodies, bring restoration cell by cell. For those battling depression, anxiety, and the heaviness of emotional pain, breathe new life into weary minds. For broken spirits crushed by disappointment and silence, pour in the oil of gladness. Touch every place that has been neglected, every wound we've learned to live with, and make it whole again. We pray for the relationships that have been fractured, marriages that feel distant, friendships strained by silence, families weighed down by unspoken hurt. Come and do what only you can. Heal what words failed to repair. Rebuild what time seemed to destroy. Remind us that no wound is too deep for your hand, no past too far gone for your grace. Breathe unity into places that feel beyond repair. Lord, we bring you the dreams that have been buried under discouragement, the visions that once burned bright but have since dimmed, the callings we've questioned, the passions we've silenced. We ask that you awaken them again. Fan into flame the purposes you placed within us before we even took our first breath. Remind us that delay is not denial, and that what you plant, you intend to harvest. Lead us back into hope with boldness. We also bring our financial needs to you, knowing that you are the God of provision. You see every bill, every decision, every empty hand. Open doors that no one else can. Surprise us with favor, pour out opportunities where there have been none. Give us wisdom to steward what we have and the faith to believe you will supply what we lack. Remind us that you are our source, not our job, not our connections, not our own efforts, but you alone. Above all, we thank you, not just for what you've done, but for who you are. You've been faithful when we were not, present when we were distant, gracious when we were ashamed. We don't deserve the love you give so freely, but we receive it today with open hands. Thank you for your patience, your presence, and your promises that never expire. You are the same yesterday, today, and forever. In that truth we stand firm. As we leave this time together, we ask for courage to live surrendered, to walk in faith even when the path is unclear, to rest in you even when the world tells us to keep running. Teach us that we seal this prayer in the name of Jesus, the one who carried our burdens, who broke every chain, who gave everything so we could be free. And we do not leave this prayer the same way we entered it. We rise renewed, restored, and realigned with heaven's purpose. Amen. Before you go, I want to invite you to do something simple but powerful. If this message spoke to you, if the words met you where you are and gave your soul room to breathe, then press the like button right now. It helps this message reach others who are looking for truth, for peace, for God's presence in the chaos. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a moment like this again. But more than that, join our community. Scroll down and comment 777 below. It's more than just a number. It's a sign of spiritual awakening, of complete trust, of divine timing. It says, I'm part of this, I'm not alone. We're building something here. A place where people from all walks of life can discover their faith, find clarity in their calling, and see how God is working in everyday life. So hit like, tap subscribe, and drop that 777 in the comments. We're excited to walk with you, pray with you, and grow with you. Your journey matters, your faith matters, and we're honored to be part of it. See you in the next message, and until then, stay with God.